I'd like to welcome everybody. I'm Van Rogerson with NCEast Alliance. During the pandemic and the slowdown of the pandemic, our board did a lot of focusing on the strategic needs of the region. And a couple of months ago, we rolled out that we were going to get stronger and more involved in regional advocacy, where we would convene, discuss, and assist critical issues for the region. So we're starting this webinar series, webinars, work sessions on important issues in Eastern North Carolina. The Eastern and Northeastern Freight and Logistics study was just being concluded during the time when we were first thinking about starting the webinar series. It seemed like a very appropriate beginning to looking at the critical issues for the area. And talking with Dana, talking with Keith and the team, we did not want to have some study that just went on the shelf. We want to just see what we can do to move issues along, identify the issues and move them along. So we're starting off with some great partners. So as you see on the screen here, today our partners that for the presentation, we have EDPNC, Sarah Bernhardt, that's always a partner in the region with our existing companies. Presenting today is going to be Keith Wheeler with ECU and Dana Magliola with DOT Freight and Logistics. So we got a great presentation with a lot of material. From that material, we hope to do a lot of things to move the region forward. We'll have a lot of discussion about how we're going to do that and talk about some future webinars. Trey, if you'll get the next slide. Want to really thank our sponsors. We have just started reaching out for webinar sponsors, our platinum sponsors, Trey. The guys that are really supportive in the early days with us was ECU, Interim Chancellor Mitchelson and Dr. Van Scott and Keith Wheeler and I really meet once a month and talk about critical issues for the region. Our offices at ECU, they are one of our major partners, as is Biden Health. Dr. Waldron is on our board. And actually, those two lead partners that we have convinced our board that we should adopt a 29 county service area. So a lot of the discussions we will have will be looking at the footprint that fits all of us. Also want to just mention a couple of other platinum partners that we have. Aaron Bull with Bull Associates, Bulling Company. We have dealt with Aaron a long time. Back in the Northeast, he helped us. And now at NCEast, he's helping us with our website, social media presence, and is a big partner with us. Then Integrated Financial Holdings, Eric Bergevin, that is the landlord for us in Edenton for the incubator that we have where Hannah's at, where our office is. So he's providing us great infrastructure for that. And we've just started actually reaching out to partners. We got a couple that have come on quickly and early. Trey, if you'll just talk as the gold, one of the ones that jumped up quickest and as of yesterday was Martin Johnson in Beaufort County, Martin Johnson and Elizabeth Underwood. And our first partner at the silver level was Nutrien, the old PCS phosphate, Ray McKeithen, certainly a big partner of ours as we're going forward. So we're starting this series. We're excited about this series. Trey's going to give you a few rules of the road for this Zoom call. And Trey, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Van. Now, I'm sure most of our attendees are professional Zoomers by now, but we want to go over a few of the tools that we're going to utilize in today's webinar. So first up, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you're going to go down to the Q&A box, type in your question, and submit it. Now, we will answer all questions at the end of the webinar, so please try and hold on to your questions towards the end. Now, if you'd like to ask a question live at the end, you can hit that raise hand icon to the right, and you can ask your question live. We'll unmute you so you can do so. Now, the chat box will be disabled for this entire webinar, so if you have a question, please type it into that Q&A box. The presenters may post some supplemental links in the chat box, so keep a lookout for those. Now, if you plan on asking a question live, you can go down to the bottom left to that audio setting tab to check your audio settings and make sure you have the correct microphone selected. Now, if you'd like to change the size of your screen during the webinar, you can go up to that view option tab at the top and change the size of your screen. You can also go to the top right and click on those 4 arrows to enter and exit full screen mode as needed. And finally, we do have a couple polls today to get everyone interactive throughout the webinar. So what will happen is we'll launch the poll. It'll pop up on your screen, and you will select one or multiple answers depending on the question, and then you'll go down to that blue submit button to submit your answers. And I think that covers everything that we'll be using today. So Keith, if you're ready, take it away.
All right, thanks, Trey. Let me share my screen and we'll get going. Trey, can you hear me all right? And can you see my first slide?
You're good to go.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. Keith Wheeler here. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of National Security and Industry Initiatives at ECU. Grew up in Manteo, spent almost 28 years in the Navy, sailing around the world on warships, and really happy to be back in the region. This month actually is my 2-year anniversary at ECU, and I could not be in a better position right now, trying to improve the region, create more opportunities, especially for students and faculty here at ECU, but also for our industry and government partners in all the 29 counties that Van was talking about. I had to put all those shields up there because Dana's got like 3 times as many that he's going to put up. So I want to talk to folks today kind of at a 30,000 foot level of 3 sectors that depend on the things, all the details Dana's going to get into later on. Just for a few minutes, he is certainly the main attraction and is the subject matter expert in logistics and supply chain, and especially with the background on these studies. And there's not a whole lot of good news overall these days, especially with the economy. But these 3 sectors here, every time I talk to people, they're optimistic. So you got to start with agriculture. It's our state's #1 sector, and 75% of that sector exists in Eastern North Carolina. And so what a lot of folks don't know is what our national rankings are for these products. Tobacco and sweet potatoes, #1 in the entire country. #2 in poultry, eggs, hogs, turkey, and trout. #3 in strawberries. #4 in cucumbers and cantaloupes. And sorry, just had a glitch. Can everybody still hear me all right?
You're good, Keith.
Okay. And #5 in peanut, squash, and catfish. So there's a considerable production presence in Eastern North Carolina, and it depends on current status and improving the distribution and supply chains for transportation and freight in the country. If we're going to maintain this rate and if we're going to be able to grow any further, what could be our #1, 2, or 3? What other opportunities other than just, growing these things, what value add opportunities could we leverage for these huge production capabilities that we have in the East? We're always looking for new opportunities like that, especially creating value add opportunities at ECU. So in aerospace, You know, we were number 7 in the PricewaterhouseCoopers rating last year. We're up to number 5 this year, which is significant. There's some amazing competition there. And so, you know, we're gonna have to work hard as a region to move up any further. You can see our worst category there is in labor, number 21 in the country. But luckily, industry, economy, and tax policy are all in the top 10 nationwide. So our NCEast, our ENC Aerospace Consortium that we kicked off last fall, and it kind of slowed down due to COVID, but workforce and labor and how we can increase that, both expand the pool and create greater capabilities within the pool in the region, I hope can drive that 21 number into a lot higher area. The other area in the bottom left here that we have the benefit in our region is that, you know, it's one of the largest military regions in the entire country. And so that creates some significant aerospace hubs. They include FRC East at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. Here, it includes the Coast Guard Aviation Logistics Center, which is the Coast Guard's global hub for all of their aviation logistics. 4th Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Air Base, and also Global Transport. You know, FEMA had a considerable footprint there for disaster response, and may potentially in the future have a longer range presence there, hopefully not disaster driven, but it's always available. But also not a lot of people know some of the more recent growth at the Global Transport. So the FRC East is expanding at Cherry Point, and they need location for their UH-1 maintenance capability. So that's going to be about 90 folks to move the Huey maintenance capabilities to Global Transport. Draken International flies aggressor squadron. So those are civilian pilots who fly military scenario sorties against our military pilots. They're going to be flying with the Air Force for our fighters at Seymour Johnson, as well as the fighters that are at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. And they've created a new facility. I think they've got 8 fighters there now at Global Transport. They may expand up to 12, and they're going to build some new hangar space there. And then North American Aerospace Industries, which makes their money in recycling and upcycling large passenger aircraft. So you can see that hangar. It's over 300,000 square foot hangar that they've committed to build. And the aircraft makes pretty much its last flight into Kinston, starts on that end of the hangar and goes through and gets broken down into, basically parted out. And, from what I read about the opportunities in other places where they do this, there's all kinds of second level startups that have the capability of getting moving for a process like that. And then the last sector that I want to talk about is biopharma. In the upper left, that's the latest 2020 report from the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. It was pre-COVID data. It was, about 5,000 new jobs in the next 5 years were projected. And you can see the average annual salary there, which is pretty considerable in North Carolina. Most of those jobs are not, probably not in the East, but just so everybody's aware, we do have considerable biopharma manufacturing presence in the East. When you look at our biopharma crescent, which stretches from Johnston County to Nash to Wilson to Edgecombe and down into Pitt County, there is considerable pharma production going on right now and has accelerated due to COVID. Many of them are producing pharmaceuticals that are being used in phase 3 clinical trials right now. So they are extremely busy. And I didn't say this was a pre-COVID study to make anyone think that this was inaccurate, that some people are debating whether or not this number might actually go up because of the increased focus in pharmaceuticals that COVID has kind of driven us into. One of the reasons that we have this presence outside the Triangle area, and Dana, I think we'll touch on some of this, is because of the supply chain providers that are in the region, and it just makes it a very good location to have these facilities. So they may be growing in a post-COVID world even more so than this chart shows. Two other areas I want to point out because it's important, specifically for biopharma, but also for some of the things Dana is gonna cover, is everyone seems to be looking at their supply chain these days. A lot of people got caught short when shipping shut down and aviation shut down, et cetera, and they're making a lot of reassessments. And so that some of them started doing it with the Chinese tariffs, I think, pre-COVID. They really started paying attention when the kind of all the lockdowns started happening. And so that reshoring drive post-COVID, it may have already started in some sectors, but there is a lot going on, it seems like, in the biopharma world in that area. And to add to that, the fact that some folks are looking at this as a national security concern, that is, 3 layers deep of rationale for a lot of supply chain assessments and analysis, as well as if there is going to be chaos in that, where APIs come from and where other supply chain sources come from. If it is going to reshore into the United States from some other country, why not look for opportunities to have those reshoring locations in the state of North Carolina? So with that, I'm gonna wrap up my talk. I just kind of wanted to set the stage, provide a little grist for the mill for some of the detailed study info that Dana is going to share, and I will turn it over to him. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Keith. I'm going to take over screen sharing here, and we'll get going on presentation. And all right. Thank you, Keith, for the introduction. Thank you, Van and NCEast Alliance, for bringing this together. To East Carolina, the EDPNC, and the other organizations that are driving these important regional conversations. I'm glad this is happening today, and I look forward to more of these. We know more today about the economy and freight transportation in Eastern North Carolina than we ever have. It's a great opportunity to use this information and understanding to guide our policy, our planning, investment, and economic development efforts. Today, I'm going to share insights from 2 recent studies that focus specifically on the region. To start, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dana Magliola, and I'm the Senior Supply Chain Analyst in NCDOT's Office of Logistics and Freight. I serve as the Supply Chain Freight and Logistics Project Manager and Subject Matter Expert at NCDOT. One of the great things I get to do is interact with the outstanding research teams on supply chain and freight-related research, and these 2 products are a great testament to the quality of that work. My background is in maritime and freight forwarding, as well as applied supply chain and operations research, really focused on, I like to say, a bias towards action. And my background, however, in this photo is one of the coolest places I've been. This is atop the new cranes at the Port of Wilmington over the Cape Fear River. So we took a group up, and I found out that I'm not afraid of heights. So that was a good development. You'll see my sort of visual career path there that's led me to DOT. And today I work to align all that we do at DOT with industrial and commercial realities, the economic realities in the communities we serve. Today we'll learn about 2 recent studies. The first is the Eastern North Carolina Regional Freight Mobility Plan, supported by the Greenville Area Urban Area MPO. Thank you, Greenville MPO, for your patience. And completed by a team from Cambridge Systematics. This in-depth study surveys freight-producing industries, public and private supply chain assets and resources, current and future infrastructure, and other dynamics, economic dynamics, transportation dynamics, to consider for industrial and commercial development in the region. The second report is the Rural Freight Transport Needs, completed by a team from NC State University's Institute for Transportation Research and Education, and supported by the UNC Global Research Institute. Actually, one of the great things about today's webinar is several of the key researchers on this project I've noticed are in our audience. So we'll have a great resource for questions and discussion, and they'll probably keep me honest too, so I hope to do them proud. This study is scoped specifically to the North Carolina's Northeast. I think it was 19 counties, and takes a similar approach to survey the current state of freight infrastructure and activities, and look for opportunities where transportation can drive that economic growth. So we're on to the Eastern North Carolina Regional Freight Mobility Plan. This study took the approach and the ambition that we put into the statewide freight mobility plan in 2017, and we brought it to a regional level. The exercise helped us capture not just the supply chain ecosystem, a word you'll hear a lot from me on, the ecosystem today, but also understand the really relevant strengths and weaknesses and some of the key opportunities at the regional level. You know, this is one of the shortcomings of any statewide study, is you're going to miss the nuance. This study really dove in to the local and regional approach. It gives us data and analytics to support a unified regional effort, an economic development effort that is collaborative and organized. I also like that is not news to this audience, generally the NCEast Alliance audience. The strength of this study was engagement. The research team had held several workshops and conversations across the region over the course of the study. They pulled literally everyone into the conversation. Government, advocacy, planners, academics, economic developers, manufacturers, commercial service providers, all involved. And this is one area where East Carolina showed a really huge commitment to its regional mission. So I'll give Keith and that organization some props here. There was not a single session we had without an ECU economic developer, researcher, professor, someone involved. So they're really bought into that, and I think that's a great resource. So their viewpoint and all of these viewpoints are really important to transportation planning and investment. I was especially happy this team could also leverage our Eastern North Carolina Regional Freight, which you'll hear is kind of a best practice that came out of this. Here's some of the organizations, companies, agencies involved, really great wide net thrown. The study captured data on which industries drive freight activity in the region, and it should come as no surprise that these are the leading regional freight producing industries. Manufacturing is a great strength in Eastern North Carolina and a legacy of the economy. But it also leads us to our first poll question of the day. I hope I do this right. Trey, keep me technologically aligned. Visit the poll that should pop up soon and pick which of these regions are your top 3 sectors most relevant to you or your specific region. Go ahead and jump on that poll, and I'll let Trey finish that out. I think you should have a little bit of time to fill that out.
Give everybody a few seconds. Looks like a lot of people are voting.
Good. We're all about voting these days, so. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about kind of keep things moving and talk about the regional goods movement profile. A part of this study that really tried to capture a snapshot of what is going on in the region today. We learned a lot about the scale of freight activity in the region, and there's a lot. In 2015, I think one of the last years on record, nearly 200 million tons of freight moved over Eastern North Carolina's transportation system. That's a value of nearly $283 billion. A major share of that was done by truck too. I think you've got 94% there. The study identified key supply chain and freight assets in the region with a multimodal scope. This is, I think, important. Airports, maritime ports, rail, and pipeline assets in Eastern North Carolina provide services to ports, power plants, mines, the military installations we discussed, and the growth in the military installations. And industries, all of those important industries, ag, forestry, plastics, furniture, all of that stuff is served by a very dynamic multimodal transportation network. As we learn about freight behavior in the region, this report kind of gets into a general economic orientation for the region, especially as you move to the north and the east, and that's focused on Hampton Roads, Virginia. The study highlighted some key economic trends facing the region, especially growth. Looking at by 2045, a volume increase in freight in the region of nearly 40% or more. So that's a significant growth rate. Values going up too. At that point, we're looking at $525 billion worth of freight annually moving on the Eastern North Carolina network. That's an increase of 43% there. So the ultimate success of development around this freight growth is going to be dependent on the health and the development of the region's supply chain ecosystem. So it's not just one sort of channel of investment or focus. It's really a kind of a holistic approach. The future is also multimodal and strongly intermodal. Active ports in the region and ongoing investment, such as CSX's Carolina Connector, are going to provide a great opportunity for the East. So these photos were shared with us by CSX in late August. I'm sure you guys have probably seen this elsewhere, but it's always great to have an update. Let me click through some of the photos, see what we got here.
Dana, if you'd like, I've got results from the poll. I'm going to show them.
Yeah, that's great. Great time to do it.
You can see the top three were agriculture, forestry and wood products, and the consumer goods, distribution and logistics.
Outstanding. I think we can even add that to the more data that we get, and this audience this is really relevant to you guys. So thank you for being here. This last shot, the containers came in through Wilmington and are awaiting assembly. So this is going to be a great project for the state. One of the key elements of Eastern North Carolina's economic future, the stability of the region economically, is the development and realization of the future interstate corridors in this region. So whether you're on Future 87, 587, Future 42 on the US 70 corridor, these upgrades will support industrial growth, economic development. You may hear this from me later in this presentation, and this is a drum that we're going to bang constantly for investment in the East. Highway-specific findings in this study centered on capacity constraints, safety and infrastructure deficiencies, and freight patterns. A lot of this is going to guide the MPO and RPO work on planning and projects over the next few years, and give them the data, the up-to-date perspective on their region that they can really plan around and maximize. We see recommendations to support the network and access to key corridors, and I'll talk a little bit about access there. The ecosystem around these corridors is going to benefit for continued investment in not just the interstate corridors, but will address rural highways. So on that, we need to have a real talk. We need to start looking at rural highways beyond the lens of volume over capacity. Just as Dr. Malcolm reminds us in Jurassic Park, life, and in this case, freight, finds a way. And more likely than not, it will move on the path of least resistance. We have to recognize that and begin to understand the role of rural highways in the movement of freight. And this study does a great job of articulating what's going on there. Take a look at this map. This is the Eastern North Carolina part of our North Carolina statewide priority highway freight network. That makes a great acronym, but I'm not going to torture you with it. That's like 10 letters in there. Where the highlighted in red, you'll see the prevalence of 2-lane rural highways in the movement of freight. Anecdotally, one of these examples is going to be 101 out of Morehead City. The geometry of the road there drives traffic west, but you still have freight moving east because it's a 55-mile-an-hour 2-lane road with no stops. And that incentivizes the use of that freight corridor. So improving these rural corridors will improve freight flow between the rural and urban areas, overall mobility, and it will holistically support those strategic corridors like future interstates. Just as I mentioned, multimodal and a largely intermodal future, Eastern North Carolina is tailored to take advantage of freight volume growth. With significant convergence of rail lines, there is a lot of freight train movement. So for example, on the CSX A line, during normal times, you're talking about anywhere between 20 and 30 trains a day. That means there's a lot of multimodal cargo handling, supply chain logistics development potential around that activity for the region. Railroads are absolutely a part of Eastern North Carolina's economic future success story. You've got CSX, Norfolk Southern, North Carolina Railroad, and I believe there's 3 other short lines in the region. This is the way that rail is accessible and the leverage that a short line has in serving regional and local clients. So rail is definitely a part of the conversation here. We learned about some of the challenging issues facing the region. And Eastern North Carolina, for example, has a higher than average truck crash rate than statewide. Between 2013 and 2017, there were more than 6,500 truck-involved highway crashes in the region, with over half of them Johnston, Pitt, Wayne, Nash, and Wilson counties. We also learned about regional bridge conditions, in an area where ag and out of gauge heavyweight cargo is a regular occurrence. That's an important consideration. We learned about at-grade crossings, and like we mentioned before, those vital rural highway networks. This report has a lot of resources and data for planners at their local and regional level. I'm excited to see where MPOs and RPOs can dive into this in their project process with more information and really the industrial and economic context. So here's a recap of the recommendations from this first study. They collectively drive home a point that an efficient and sustainable freight transportation network, an ecosystem, is vital to the region's economic health and competitiveness. We can't have a myopic modal view, a sector-only view, because so much of the future is integrated. We've covered a lot of these in the preceding slides, but Trey's got me on for another poll. So we're going to find out which of these recommendations is most important to you. Tell us your top 3, and if technology does its job, there it is. Give us your top 3, and we'll revisit this a little bit later in the presentation. I'll let you guys see it. I think you can see them on there too, right, Trey? So I'm going to move on.
Yeah, you got it.
All right. And moving on, I'll jump into our second study. This is where we'll hear another research effort from a statewide important study taking a regional approach. The Rural Freight Transport Needs Study was built on the findings and recommendations of the landmark 2010 7 Portal study that initially tied transportation infrastructure investment to economic development and really brought a lot of data and information to that conversation. This research brought the focus regionally to the far southwest and northeast regions of North Carolina. Again, the strength of this study was engagement, really connecting in the community and the region to better understand the local landscape. And that was a great strength from interviews that went on in this research, and especially the workshops that were held regionally. This report also has an outstanding socioeconomic analysis of those counties done by UNC's Global Research Institute. So that's one of those kind of background information sources that's very valuable to consider. Socioeconomic challenges are not new to Eastern North Carolina, and they definitely factor into economic and transportation decisions. This report was also kind of like 4 reports in one. So as I mentioned, the socioeconomic study, workshop studies are independently informative. We get into a lot more detail from the Northeast and Southwest regional workshop summaries, and you'll hear a little bit more from those here in a second. Here's an idea of where the study was. Oh, do we have a result?
Yeah, we got some results. So I'm going to end it and show it, and you can talk about it.
All right, let's do it.
There you go.
So I like you'll hear this from me later, but that is one of the findings of both reports, one of the recommendations from both of these. Really aligns with what I'd say is the commitment to the strategy of a regional approach by everybody we've been discussing today. Support for interstate development, that one is for sure. And then I like to see this also, regional supply chain development in planning and policy. As we're not planning for it, or if the laws and policies are not favorable, we won't gain the development pace that we should. And that's nothing new to economic development. Thank you. So as I said, this was hyper-focused on the Northeastern geography. We had a really strong business community and industry participation in this. And I'll tell you a little bit about what they found. The key concept of developing regional industries stood out in this report and in this study, especially around these 4 core sectors where we think there's the most opportunity. The offshore wind sector and the supply chain that supports it, boat building and coastal services, maritime marine services, industrial seafood production, and there's a full spectrum of kind of what that means, and then value-added agricultural products, which you might say industrial seafood production is kind of a close cousin to that. So really highlighting the region's strengths, some of the natural resources that are prevalent, and making those building as much of the ROI for the region and investment as we can around these sectors. I'll jump into the details, but be sure to catch my subtle endorsement of inland waterway freight movement here with this Stevens towing barge from, I want to say the Chihuahua River. Keith's view out of his backyard, I think. Highway, waterway, and other transportation networks connect eastern North Carolina, and this is something we admitted in the first study, to the northeast, to Norfolk, to the Hampton Roads economic sort of metro area. That's a trend that will continue and will be a great opportunity for the region. You know, we're in a great position to do that. As Keith pointed out in the PwC study, we have challenges in labor. You know, workforce plays into the equation, and regional efforts to channel outgoing military personnel into the region's workforce, that will bolster capabilities and possibilities. I think that's a major strategic goal for the workforce community in this area. And lastly, we're here convened by NCEast Alliance. I think we're all on message considering the results of the poll, and it's highlighting how important it is to be regionally focused. You know, we can't just be out for one county. It doesn't work that way. The economy doesn't work that way, and the supply chain definitely doesn't. So that regional advocacy can support growth, recruiting, and development. I'm excited to see what Van's doing and his team, what they have in the works. So I think this is a great series. This slide should be familiar because both studies recommend it. Realizing these future interstate corridors will be a big, big part of this equation. I'll get into the first sector, Northeast, the opportunity in offshore wind energy. The Wright brothers knew what they were doing when they went to the Outer Banks. The wind power sector recognizes this natural resource as well. There are already onshore wind farms in the region. Offshore wind energy is a rapidly growing industrial sector relevant for the region, not only just in participation of, you know, having turbines out there catching the wind, but developing the supply chain that serves the global sector. You know, that's one of those opportunities we have that Keith hinted at, and you're going to hear over and over around these two studies. There's so many companies active in the wind power supply chain and others with capabilities and technologies that can get into that supply chain, that need that tech transfer. You know, I think this is a great economic development opportunity, and it's an outstanding opportunity to engage colleges, universities, community colleges in that tech transfer process. Some of the most interesting innovations and industrial applications of technologies we use every day comes out of that space. This isn't, so one of the great things that's happening too is we're about to learn more. An important foundational study, we'll call it, on the offshore wind energy supply chain is now underway, led by our colleagues at North Carolina Department of Commerce. I know Van and the Alliance will be sharing more details on a future webinar. I don't have the date, but I think Trey will tell us about that.
Yeah.
Here's a visual of today's sort of wind power supply chain in North Carolina. And it hits a big theme in these reports: develop the supply chain sector. So this is today. This is a great resource provided by the Southeastern Wind Coalition that builds these maps. You can click on relevant industries, and this map is nearly covered. So, you know, we're in a great spot. We have to turn over the leaf and start to do it. Another key sector is the coastal industry of boat building. Marine services. So many kinds of boats are manufactured in North Carolina. I'm gonna enjoy this. I wrote it down. Shad boats, sailboats, fishing yachts, mullet skiffs, flounder boats, beach dories, troop trawlers, passenger and automobile ferries, and the list keeps going. There are more than 40 active boat builders in North Carolina. You've got Jarrett Bay, Fountain, B&B, Albemarle, Grady White, Regulator, WorldCat, Kencraft, Carolina Classic, US Workboats. There's so many. I probably left someone out and I apologize. Please put it in the comments, what boat builder I've left out. But that's the point. There's such a robust sector. The economic impact is huge too. Look at the 15 boat builders in Dare County. They represent a substantial part of the 47 manufacturing businesses in the county, with employing over 270 workers. That's one county. So I think this is something that you see, not just the educational and workforce support, but really the critical mass in the region to make this a success. Another key economic trend identified in the report is the growing global demand for protein. Serving this demand is a great opportunity for Eastern North Carolina, one in which the region is already a world leader, as Keith pointed out. So it's no surprise that seafood and agricultural production are a regional strength. Yet the opportunity lies in taking a more industrial approach or finding innovative ways to develop new agricultural products or build new markets. From farm-raised catfish to specially packaged berries to vodka, probably one of the best products that we can all enjoy. Eastern North Carolina is producing new and profitable value-added ag products regularly. And I've put a couple of examples in here. And when you talk about finding new markets, sweet potatoes are also a case study. Introducing sweet potatoes into the European marketplace pushed that crop to our largest ag export. We have to be creative about the things that we may take for granted that are great resources here and find new markets abroad. Aquaculture is one of, I think, the more interesting ones. It's already active in the region, from oysters to tilapia. There's a couple other things happening in aquaculture. Eastern North Carolina is already in this game. Continued investment in this sector will not only increase freight exports, but there are related benefits for local economies. I like this, and this is something that the team found in the Southwest as well. Take, for example, the North Carolina Oyster Trail. This is a tourism draw based on equal parts aquaculture and regional innovation. We're going to raise these oysters. This is a specialty for our region. Let's bring in some tourism. In the Southwest, you see a lot of ecotourism around their natural resources, mountains and rivers, and things like that. So we've talked a lot about the role infrastructure plays in economic development, but Eastern North Carolina is also lucky to have a big portfolio of navigable rivers. This is a natural resource, just like wind, that is not free, but landside asset investment is going to be important, and development in that area is nascent. And generally, I would say privatized, generally run by a company. Dredging and environmental concerns are also a challenge. We have proof of concept with several ongoing barge operations in the state. You can pull up some of that picture I had earlier, or look at some of the description on the slide. But if we are able to develop maritime highways, it'll benefit the longevity of our landside multimodal investment. Local planners are already thinking about this too. That's exciting. Several counties' comprehensive transportation plans are addressing river assets. There are also local and I think county level regional incentives to help recruiting and sector growth. NCDOT's ferry division's recent designation as a Maritime Administration's Marine Highway Grant Project will offer potential additional federal funding to their operations in the region. Ferries are already a freight lifeline for many in coastal communities, and this provides opportunity to additional federal funding. Funding is always the question. So as we've seen in the growth of ports at Norfolk, Wilmington, Charleston, Savannah, containerization is a key technology to consider for freight handling, which will expand operational connectivity to these regional ports. As you look into maximizing the maritime highways in Eastern North Carolina, we have to figure out operationally, how do they work with the surrounding ports? So when Keith and I were talking about this study, I said, you can introduce this as, I'm the guy that read, there's like 300 or 400 pages of reports, and I'm the guy that read them for you. But I'm going to try and distill all that, it's not easy, into some common threads. These 4 recommendations, I think, are the most compelling, supported by both studies, and I think will really be relevant to this audience. So building on industry here today, or developing in the region, supporting that supply chain development, through transportation investment, planning, and policy will pay dividends. The next is growth in the multimodal connectivity of the region. Invest in the freight handling assets that will support and enable growth. This opens up every marketplace for regional industry, local, regional, domestic, global marketplaces. If you're able to connect in a multimodal transportation network to a marketplace, you can be in that market. Keep pushing to realize future interstate corridors. This is about connectivity as well, and fluidity and efficiency. Those interstate corridors are important, but remember the feeder networks that are vital to so many communities in the region. Those rural roads that we need to keep in mind as well. And lastly, this is one we're here demonstrating today. Promote a cohesive and coordinated approach to economic development. Make sure you start with people in the mix, and make sure your engagement is holistic. I think manufacturing and industry, commercial and service sectors, government officials, we're not always meeting together. Policymakers, planners, economic developers, and community advocates, they need to all be at the table. The output, the final product will be better as a result, and it'll be more relevant. I'll commend NCEast for not only their legacy of regional advocacy, but what they're continuing to do today through sessions like this. Now that's a lot. I'm pushing probably a half an hour, and I love that everybody was hopefully still tuned in and awake, but these are really interesting studies that I think are going to give us a whole lot of insight into the region. I want to make sure we recognize the outstanding research teams that are responsible for these reports. I also want to thank Van and Trey for hosting and having me today, and NCDOT Research and Development for funding and support, as well as our friends at HWA. So the group from ITRI at NC State University, outstanding work. Cambridge Systematics, a great team. The work done by the Global Research Institute at UNC is so informative and timely. And I think we're in really good hands with this kind of research infrastructure in our state. So thanks to those folks. Here's my contact information if you'd like to connect. You can also visit our Logistics and Freight online on our DOT homepage. We're working on getting our Connect resources page up and running. If that's probably something familiar to a lot of planners who use the Connect side of NCDOT's web. That is where we will host these reports, and I will have those links to you. Actually, these bit.ly links, if they work without asking you to log in, then our site is live. And you'll find those reports under research and reports. And that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to, like I said, we're happy to jump in with questions, conversation. Van?
Dana, I'll start off. I have a couple of questions that were texted to me during your presentation. We got some people on phone and some in person and that sort of thing. So here's one, actually it's pretty dear to my heart. It says, if I-87 continues to be a challenge in developing it in its entirety, are there sections that could be prioritized in order to service critical nodes? For instance, the state line down to Elizabeth City to Coast Guard base, state line down to Perquimans barge site, etc. Your thoughts on all of that? It's really kind of a setup for the work session that we're going to have in January that we hope to actually talk about and develop a strategy for I-87. But your thoughts, Keith's thoughts on all of that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm good for a good setup. You can't turn down a good setup. I-87 is an important corridor. All of the future interstate corridors are. I think what we can take away from these studies, and my viewpoint is we are now far better informed to advocate and to bring data and analysis to that conversation, continue to drive development and realization in those corridors. So, these kind of studies and the level of engagement that you're seeing in the region, that's going to inform that strategy. And I'm sure Keith probably has some more sort of really relevant comments in that because they're so involved.
Well, it allows us to start having the discussion / negotiation, right? Because you show the importance of having it, but through whatever reasons, there are going to be barriers and challenges to implementing it in its entirety. So are there, maybe the priority is not from the state line. Maybe it's from Williamston to CSX or, somewhere in there where you can connect a body of water to a rail hub or a major port facility. But this body of work gives us the ammunition, so to speak, to start having those discussions.
I've got one more, and I'll throw that out there. This sounds also like one of those issues that we're going to have some conversation with, and we actually have at least one person from the Port of Virginia but on the webinar. But is there potential for an inland port facility similar to Richmond in the NCEast region? And I don't know, maybe you need to. I think you're pretty familiar with that one, Dana.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about what they did up in Virginia. Sure. and talk about possibility.
Yeah, we highlight the inland waterways as an opportunity, and Virginia's proven proof of concept on their James River barge service. They were able to build out the infrastructure there through state investment, federal investment, creative investment, like using CMAQ air quality funding to essentially take trucks off the road and invest in that facility. And it took them a few years to realize the sustainability of that activity, where it took them a while to build the customer base to make that a viable run. I think that we can learn from their lessons. I think that's what Eastern North Carolina is in a great position to do, and figure out what are the pitfalls we can avoid that they fell into. And we are also having these conversations with North Carolina ports. How do we maximize their reach to markets in North Carolina? And they see the value in Eastern North Carolina waterways. So these are great questions to have, and it's great to have someone that's a little bit out there in front of us that we can kind of see the crib sheet on what to do and what not to do.
I see that Aaron Ouellette is from the Port of Virginia's on the webinar. Aaron, we're going to be circling back to you with some of these questions, obviously, in our discussions in the future. That's it for me as far as questions I got text.
Dana, we have a few questions coming in. But first, I want to address a comment from Sarah Bernhardt at ADP&C. She says they have a supplier's guide for companies to use in recruiting their suppliers from North Carolina. And if anybody's interested in that supplier's guide, she will send it to you. Sarah and all attendees, I have opened up the chat box. So Sarah, you can throw your email in the chat box if you'd like. And also, if anybody has any more questions, they can throw them in the chat box. I do have one, Dana, from Martin Johnson.
Yeah.
He says, how do we move forward developing the Northeast Transportation Regional Strategy?
So, I think we can use, like I think Keith referred to, this body of work is going to help inform that. Part of the rollout on this is going to be re-engaging the research team to continue to push this model of regional engagement around economic research. So I think you'll see more out of Dr. List and his team at ITRI on this. You'll see more from us on rolling out these studies to RPOs and MPOs and helping to guide them through these questions. And I spent a lot of time internally at DOT on educating around freight behavior. And I think once we're all in that mindset, you'll start to see it inherently built into planning and some of the strategy going forward. But that's kind of my approach to how we're going to implement a strategy. Now, I think Van and his group is going to be a huge driver in that conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dana. We also have another question from David Goss. Dave asked, does NCDOT have funds to assist in waterway development, given its importance in Northeastern North Carolina?
And I'll also read the next question that says, not to be cynical, but planning will have a difficult time becoming a reality if the state cannot figure out a sustainable funding mechanism for NCDOT. So I think those are very related, and I think we're trying what we can, figuring out. There's a NC First Commission that's looking into it. We're looking at different ways of viewing technology and the agency's role in that. So federal funds, something like a Maritime designation gives you at least access to apply for funds, but the funding question at the federal and state level will remain the biggest challenge to most state DOTs. And of course that cascades locally. And you're not cynical. I think we like candor. I think candor is a good thing in this conversation.
Well, we need to be prepared if there is some kind of stimulus package that comes out for infrastructure development, that we want these key corridors considered. Now, I don't know how the federal funds will flow down to the state and whether we can get our portion of them, but we certainly should be standing up with our hand up saying we want a part of those. And politically, as a region, some issues like this, we've got to figure that out, how we collectively together try to push certain issues forward.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that research like this should have a legislative audience. You know, it's going to inform conversation and policy, but a lot of that policy gets driven too at the local level. So working with the technical committees and advisory committees and RPOs and MPOs, you know, I think that's another path to get ready. If the stimulus package comes down from the feds, you know, we're prepared. That's always that's a big question mark. There's a lot of big question marks.
One thing on my mind with regard to that, again, back to the body of work. So the experts have told us what the art of the possible is, but it doesn't necessarily go the next step, which would say, here's why you should do A, B, and C in that order. Where's your next dollar going to go? Eastern North Carolina. So, you know, and it's, in many cases, we might not know unless industry weighs in. So when you look at Nucor, who basically has their own barge system that was set up, you know, they're right over here on the Chowan River. When you look at Nutrien, that has their own barge and rail capability set up. You know, so what's the so what of the analysis for needing another barge system or needing another cold storage facility and where it would go? And that, I think, you know, you're spot on. State and federal funding would be awesome, but I think in today's world and budget constraints, et cetera, with a request without the so what of here's why it will make a difference. And we've heard this from these industry partners who have said, if I had a barge facility on the Albemarle Sound or on the Pamlico River or wherever it would make sense to go for some modeling to show, you know, that would provide a little more oomph behind where those next dollars should go and setting those priorities.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's, you know, what puts it at the top of the list, and that's where you engage the people. I think that's what my biggest pull away is. Anything we do in the future, we're talking about transportation. We're not talking to everybody. If we're just talking to planners and planners are talking to planners, we're not going to be prepared for what industry needs. Industry has the impetus there to get involved. You know, I think this kind of approach opens an invite to industry to engage agencies like DOT and the Department of Commerce to be more collaborative and not just sort of work on what we build. You know, use what we build. It's got to be a partnership.
I'm seeing a move afoot, and I think I saw Amanda in the room to take industry and force them to the center of the room with some facilitation. Yeah. And make these problems theirs, and to get the solutions or the needs prioritized based on whatever the sector is. You know, we're having this discussion specifically in the aerospace sector, but it could be in the boat building sector.
Yeah.
Get those industry leaders, not the HR person, you know, the leader in the room and say, hey, you know, I didn't realize I had 39 other presidents or CEOs that have this exact same problem in Eastern North Carolina. And then around that room are all of the economic developers, universities, community colleges, K through 12, government leaders saying, oh, didn't know that was a problem for all of you because I was just talking to the folks in my county or in Greenville or at my university or at my other institution. We can scale this amongst all of us and get after these regional problems in a very prioritized and strategic fashion.
Dana, Keith, we have another Question from Rex Rayford. He mentions that an offshore wind energy program would be a great catalyst for federal and state funding. What are your thoughts?
One, hey to Rex, the man who knows the back roads of Eastern North Carolina. I always ask him for directions, how to get where I'm going. Rex, it's a great point, that this is a huge opportunity. I think we're going to know more. I hate to say wait and see, but I'm really excited to see the investment Commerce is making in a thorough research and review of the sector. That's going to give us maybe not the 1 through 5 list of what to do that Keith would like to see, but it's going to give us the information to make that decision. So wait and see.
Got a couple others coming in. One from Todd Edwards. He says, given our positioning geographically as a halfway point in regards to the East Coast population centers, does the NCDOT and others often blur lines even beyond adjoining state lines to look at our potential place in an even bigger national potential logistics picture?
Yeah, that's a great setup. Thank you, Todd, for that question. Yes, absolutely. Especially in the Northeast, in the East, you're looking at the economic orientation of Virginia. We work closely with those bordering counties. We work with the Virginia DOT. You're seeing joint investment and strategic planning around rail corridors between the states. We work with South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee on where they connect to North Carolina and where those markets bring share of wallet into North Carolina. So I'd even take it down to the research and analytics side. We work really closely on congestion data and cost of congestion to commercial industry, things like that are very sort of transportation land statistics. But that stuff we look at across borders because, I-95 doesn't just end at Emporia. It keeps going. So the dynamics there are important. So the great question, great setup.
Also, we've got Brian Alligood coming in, mentioning to your slide about life or transportation finds a way. In rural areas, the heavily driven 2-lane roads need to be a priority as maintenance funds continue to be constrained. I don't anticipate additional roadways being constructed in these areas based on the congestion factor in the funding formula. So we have to maintain, expand existing something roads.
Well-trodden roads, yeah.
Well-trodden roads, there you go.
It's a great, you're not going to see rural roads replaced by new construction. That's not going to be a prevalent trend. One of the things that I think they're doing with the prioritization program at DOT is making projects like that where you're dealing with pavement condition, shoulder, the operational capabilities of the road is a separate scoring category. And I think that will help bring some of those projects to light where they can make an impact. And I always go back to this, that the behavior of freight is incentivized. Like you said, life finds a way. And if we can understand what the business incentive or the logistics incentive, whether it's total logistics cost or time or predictability, it can take 10 days and that may seem like forever, but if it takes 10 days every time, we can plan around that, as a business. So as we start to develop that kind of understanding, I think that's going to factor into success there.
Yeah, some more. Another one from Dave Goss. For the Port of Virginia, how can Northeastern North Carolina get involved with the offshore wind hub being developed at the port? What is the supply chain potential?
Yes. Yes, John. Yes is the answer. Absolutely. CSX is going to be great. We're seeing how it's developing into CSX's business strategy. And I think that depends a lot. That changes a lot of where, what marketplaces are relevant for us. But I think there are positive developments there. And the access to multimodal assets throughout the state is going to continue to make CSX a central point. You'll see Secretary Tolson and Carolina Gateways, they're looking at industrial development around that facility. But it's not just limited to around that facility. If you can connect to that facility and you can bring value, predictability, resilience, a lot of the things that businesses are looking for now, then you're relevant to that growth opportunity using CSX. Doesn't have to just be in Edgecombe and Nash counties. I'd like to ask the researchers on the team if we did them right. If there's any things that they really felt they wanted to drive home that we skipped over. I think Daniel's on here. I think I saw Steve Burt. Oh no, maybe they left. Sorry to call you guys out. Oh, he said, Steve said I did all right with this. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think a couple of them want to chime in live. So Peter Kuklanis, Dr. Kuklanis, I'm going to allow you to talk to see if you'd like to say something live. Go ahead.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'd like to thank Keith, Dana, and Trey for a really terrific presentation, first of all. And I think, at least from my point of view, from the Global Research Institute, I think you did us very well, Dana. Just a couple of little points. I think in our study, that is to say the NC State UNC study, I think one of the key findings, I think, is that there is somewhat of a difference in subregions in the Northeast, in Elizabeth City area versus, or in contrast to the Greenville, Pitt County area. There are two nodes and they have somewhat different orientations and profiles. And that's something to keep in mind when we build this ecosystem approach. Secondly, I would like to emphasize my support for this regional ecosystem approach, and particularly working with Virginia and the Hampton Roads area to create a win-win. Thirdly, I think as part of this ecosystem, getting the people in the educational community from K through 12, community colleges, all the way through the universities is really vital. And the fourth point I would like to make, and this comes through very much in the part of the report, the freight report that the GRI did, is that history matters here. And in the historical section, if anyone wants to go back to it, the same types of problems that we are facing today in terms of relative isolation, poor connectivity in the Northeast have been with us for 300 years. And there's been a litany of complaints and hand-wringing and efforts to solve this relative isolation problem in the northeastern part of North Carolina, whether it's roads or rail, for 300 years. And we need to kind of fix that. And I think we are well on our way to it. So thank you very much.
Well, Dr. Kuklanis, I give you a credit on this. That socioeconomic report and the background is outstanding, and it should be read, because the context of poverty, context of access to education, that's as important to this conversation. It's the ecosystem. I hate to beat the jargon to death, but that's really where it is. Outstanding. Thank you.
So we've also got Daniel. So Daniel, I'm going to unmute you.
Dr. Finley.
Opportunity to be involved, and Dana, I'll second that you did a great job sharing our study. And one of the things that was kind of struck me in—
Daniel, you got to speak up. We can barely hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. So one of the things that struck me was the similarities between the Southwest and the Northeast. So even though there's lots of differences, and you could spend a lot of time maybe talking about those, but I think in particular, one of the things that we noticed and noted is that there's these natural barriers in the Southwest. It happens to be mountains, and in the Northeast, in the Southwest, it happens to be mountains, and in the Northeast, it happens to be waterways, but they still cause a lot of circuitous routes and longer detours and kind of inefficiencies by having to drive around mountains and drive around bodies of water. And, just I think there's a natural partner on those two sides of the state for, policy level infrastructure investments to kind of say, look, when we have flooding, we have issues with, overrunning our roads in the Northeast, and in the Southwest, when there's heavy rains and there's washouts, we lose road connectivity too. So that was something to me that was a little bit striking, is that how those regions could be kind of partners and supportive of similar policies.
I think that was one of those findings. The economic orientation in the Southwest is different, and the opportunities they have depend on that orientation. Some of their opportunities is pulling share of wallet from Georgia and South Carolina. One of the greatest, I think, examples we saw in the Southwest is that, getting between Franklin and Atlanta, there's two routes. One goes through North Carolina and one goes through South Carolina. And the one in North Carolina, you're going to spend more of your money on gas and hotels and restaurants in North Carolina. So it makes sense to prioritize that competitive routing. And in the Northeast, you look at that same question of competitive routing, only it's usually driven more by industrial manufacturing questions and transport of freight. So that's a great point. And Daniel's a native of the far Southwest, and his wisdom on that study was outstanding. And it just proves the point. If you don't have local people involved, you're going to get a report that can sit on a shelf and be regionally insignificant. Not to preach.
Looks like we have one more question, and maybe Van will close us out. John Chafee, what's the most surprising discovery arising from the two studies? You're muted.
I just answered it on mute, so can I keep going? No. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. I think I was really excited to learn about offshore wind and how it fits into an economic opportunity there. That's not just for putting turbines off the coast. We have an opportunity to put turbines off the coast, and the governor's executive order 80 incentivizes that, drives our planning in that direction. They're in the policy and planning stages, making sure the laws are right to enable it. But that opportunity was the biggest surprise, the scale of that opportunity. So that was exciting. I think that was the most surprising for me. Aquaculture in the West, aquaculture in the East is a huge opportunity too. We're doing aquaculture, I would say semi-industrially in the East, where you have in tributary oyster farms, in the river kind of catfish farms, whereas you take a far more industrial approach, and you could be raising all kinds of things using the technology that we have today in warehousing and life science technology that can keep fish alive. I think it's salmon. I think they raise a ton of salmon in Miami in a warehouse. That's sort of agnostic to where you put things. If you have an infrastructure that can get it in and out, then that's an opportunity there. So I think that's something that the study drew out that I hadn't thought about. So I think everybody should read these too. I'll have the links. I'll make sure Trey and Van send out the links so you can read these reports yourself and a lot of the supporting material. I think that's going to be really important for that MPO and RPO audience. So please engage with us. Please come bang on our door for help.
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll send out both studies as well as a recorded webinar sometime tomorrow. Awesome. Well, there may be one. Okay, answered that. The recording will be available sometime tomorrow, hopefully. But I don't see any other questions or comments. So thank you guys so much. Van?
Okay. You gonna put something on the screen for me?
Yeah, it's coming. There you go.
So, we want to convene meaningful discussions just like we've had today. We started off with this freight and supply chain study. We have looked ahead at a few things that we want to continue discussions on that adds knowledge in these areas. Keith and Dana and I have talked about a November 18th industrial supply chain discussion that we'll have is probably a panelist type situation that will discuss various perspectives on industrial supply chain as well as e-commerce supply chain. A lot of smaller entrepreneurial companies are in the rural East. Certainly we want to talk about the opportunities for those guys. And then down in January 14th, we just arbitrarily picked one of the corridors to have a work session on, but we will try to get strategic people along the corridor and political people in hopefully Virginia and North Carolina to have a work session to plan some strategy to move that project along. The one thing we want to do is make sure that we don't just sit static with this one study that came out. As you can see, we're going to do an economic update on December 18th. That's going to be kind of cool. The people who are investing in the advocacy we're trying to do, the webinars, the wanting to make a difference. Our group is going to have a private partners meeting on the 21st. I hope to grow that quite a bit. We have looked ahead in February and cybersecurity and Industry 4.0. That's something that ECU and Keith, that's up his wheelhouse quite a bit. So we'll be doing that in February. We assume that we'll have the Department of Commerce offshore wind study back by the end of December, January, so we can start working on a work session the end of February to try to make a difference in that sector on our side. So just stay tuned for all of those. We really need recommendations from all of you on how to proceed, what is important, what we should be focusing on, because we've got to be a cohesive, collective entity trying to make a difference in the Northeast. So I thank you for today. Thank you for joining us. Trey, you got anything else before we sign off? Dana, Keith? Sounds like we're good.
One
Thank you.
request from Dave Goss is for us to include the wind supply chain in the November 18th industrial supply chain discussion.
Okay, we'll do. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Appreciate you joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.